believe we're recording. All right. That's not the right thing. Let's go right here. There we go. And so we got the review sheet. All right. Let's go from let's go through the French and Indian War first. All right. So the French are the ones that come in Canada. All right. It's cold, so there's not going to be that many people there in Canada. Champlain, you remember he's the father of New France. And he made nice with the Indians. All right, he got along a lot better with the Indians than British leaders got along with the Indians in the present day United States. All right, so and the biggest reasons for that was math. You know, there just wasn't that many French settlers. 3 reasons for that. Not much of a pull factor. All right, so that's going to be the climate. All right, number 2. You don't have the economic push factor. The French peasants had land, so they don't have the reason to leave. All right, and then the 3rd reason was you don't have anybody like the Puritans that are coming over for religious freedom. The Huguenots were tolerated over in France, so you don't have the 2 push factors. You don't have poor peasants. You don't have angry religious folks, and you don't have the pull factor of the good climate. All right, French Indian War is going to be fought over the Ohio Valley. All right, so France is kind of moving south. The English are moving west. You know that Washington is the guy that is the Virginia surveyor. All right, he's fighting 2 battles. It's at Fort Duquesne and Fort Necessity after that. Braddock is the guy who got killed in the first battle for the British, and it was fought using guerrilla warfare, but he's the guy who used conventional warfare, and his last words were, "Hey, we'll know better how to fight them next time." Okay, Frederick the Great is he's the Prussian leader who is kind of attracting soldiers to fight against him. So the French and the Austrians and the Russians are all fighting against this Prussian leader, Frederick the Great. And the result of that, he doesn't necessarily win, doesn't necessarily defeat anybody, but the result of that is that the French can't send a bunch of soldiers over to North America to fight, whereas William Pitt, right there, who ends up being the hero of the war, sends lots of British soldiers fight in North America. All right, once the soldiers get there, you pretty much win when you get the capital. So the British won at Quebec. What was it? It was Wolfe versus Montcalm there, and remember they snuck up on them on the plains of Abraham. The other 2 battles are Louisbourg and Montreal. All right, Treaty of Paris, 1763. Britain's a big winner, so they get the land there. All of North America. France has got to get out, so none of North America is owned by the French except for the island of Haiti. All right, and then the British get Florida as well, and the Spanish get Cuba. All right, the colonists and the British don't like each other too much. They had fought on the same side, but both sides accused each other of being cowards. And then on top of that, the colonists saw the British as kind of snobby, elitist, and the British saw the colonists backwoods, hillbilly, redneck, something like that. All right, and that's the war. All right, now let's look up here. Probably have the same material if I go, nope, not right here, right there. All right, so there's, the religious people are not coming over. Champlain's the father of New France. There's the reasons folks are not coming. Let's see. There's the Ohio Valley. That's what they're fighting over in the 2 battles that Washington fought in. Let's see. We'll get through all that. Boom, boom. All right. It's a world war. There's Frederick the Great. So he's attracting those armies to fight against him. So that means that Pitt can send everybody over there. There's Braddock. He's the guy that gets killed fighting over there. There's Pitt. All right, he's the guy that sends the troops over. Louisbourg's the first victory. All right, Quebec. They're winning at Quebec. That really helps them. All right, Montreal falls. So there you got the Treaty of Paris. There's the terms of the Treaty of Paris. And that's it. All right, let me take a breath and come back up here. All right. So then we got the laws, right? The next chapter is just about the laws. All right, so what do we have? We start right there. So Navigation Acts, that's this notion that you're only supposed to trade with Britain. All right, mercantilism I have misspelled right there, should have an A. But that's the theory that money is power and that colonies exist so that the mother country make a lot of money. So the mother country is going to export more than they import, and they're going to export manufactured goods. The colony is going to provide raw materials. So then you got these two political theories. Republicanism is the theory that if people are good, they can run their own affairs. They don't need anybody to tell them what to do. The Whigs over in Britain didn't like the king. All right. So it's in this context that the British start passing these laws. All right, Proclamation of 1763 said you couldn't move west of the Appalachians. There were Indians out there waiting to fight, and so the British didn't want to pay to protect colonists out in the west from those Indians. Daniel Boone and others disobeyed the Proclamation of 1763. Went on out there anyway. Okay, the Sure Act is the next big law. It's really enforcing the Navigation Acts. There was already existing tax on molasses. It raises that tax. The response is nothing drastic. They kind of grumble, but no big deal. All right, the one that really gets everybody fired up is the Stamp Act there. All right, so we know the Stamp Act's a tax on paper. So many different things in the colonies were made out of paper: newspapers, playing cards, death certificates, birth certificates, marriage certificates. All right, so it's a tax on lots of different stuff. So the Sons of Liberty get all fired up about it, do several things. They're boycotting British goods. They're intimidating the tax agents. The Stamp Act Congress is going to send a list of grievances to Britain. All right, the committees of correspondence are they're corresponding with the rest of the colonies. They're keeping everybody informed about all the bad stuff that the British are doing. And most of the controversy is really taking place in Boston. So if you're in a southern colony, you need somebody kind of write you to tell you what's going on. All right, we remember, I think, that the Daughters of Liberty made the clothes during the boycott of the British goods. All right. All right, so the Stamp Act got repealed, so they backed up. British backed up, but they passed this thing, the Declaratory Act, saying they did too have the right to tax. All right, so the first tax is going to be the Townshend Act. That's the one on glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. Remember, it's an external tax. So Townshend there, the prime minister, was thinking the colonists wouldn't gripe so much if the tax was paid at the port rather than inside the colonies. All right, within a few years, the response to the Townshend Act was the Boston Massacre. You know, the Sons of Liberty are drinking in the tavern, and they moan and groan about things, and they go to the customs house where the money's being kept, and they throw the snowballs and so forth, and eventually people get killed there. Paul Revere has the engraving of it. So the British back down, and so then they get rid of the tax on glass, lead, paper, and paint. They only keep the one on tea. All right, but the Tea Act itself is a later law that gets passed that gives a monopoly to the British East India Tea Company, so colonial merchants couldn't sell tea, and the colonists wouldn't take the imported tea, so it's just sitting there on the boat. So one night they dump it all overboard, $1.5 million worth of tea. So the British are going to make the colonists pay them back. So that's called the Coercive Acts. When you make somebody do something, you're coercing them. All right, and the colonists said we can't take it, so they called it the Intolerable Acts. What it did was it closed the ports and the legislatures, basically shut down the colonies until they paid them back. All right, so the Continental Congress meets and they draw up a list of grievances again, and they also start storing up guns. And so the British come to get the troublemakers in Lexington, Sam Adams and John Hancock, and they're coming to Concord to get the guns. There's two battles. The British win at Lexington. You know, they're fighting against the Minutemen there. And then when they're marching back from Concord, the colonists get the best of them. All right, I believe that's that chapter. Let's come up there and take a look at slides, kind of go with it. It's not that. Here we go. All right, so there's the debt. So there's Proclamation 1763. They don't want to pay for them. Daniel Boone's the guy who goes out there. There's the two political theories. Good citizens and Whigs don't like the king. All right, there's the theory of mercantilism, that money's power. You want to have a favorable balance of trade. That's what the Navigation Acts is. All the trade's got to benefit Britain in some way or another. All right, for the longest time, I don't guess that made the review sheet, but for the longest time, they kind of looked the other way while the smuggling took place. But then they were in debt, so they got to enforce it. So there's Sugar Act there, increases the tax, there's existing tax. Stamp Act's tax on all that paper. Ooh. There's old James Otis. He was the guy that may have ended up with a skillet tied to his brain. All right, so there they are taking, the Sons of Liberty taking action on it. The Daughters of Liberty are the ones making the clothes. All right, so they're repealing it, pass a declaratory act. So the Townsend Acts leads to the Boston Massacre. There's the different pictures we looked at of it. So the Tea Act, it gives the monopoly to the British Tea Company, and you got the Tea Party. All right, so the Intolerable Act closes the ports and legislatures. So they gripe about it yet again in Continental Congress. Lexington and Concord's the first shots. All right, and that takes care of it. All right, okay, so let's head back up to the war. So the next chapter is on the war. All right. All right, Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill was the Pyrrhic victory. Remember, the colonists were at the 1775. So we're not saying Americans just yet. We don't say Americans until 1776. So the colonists in Boston are at the top of the hill. It was actually Breed's Hill, but they thought Bunker Hill sounded better, and they pushed back the British twice. But then the third time they were out of ammunition. So the British took the hill, but they didn't feel that great about it because they hadn't fought all that well. All right, so then you've got the arguments for independence. So Thomas Paine writes Common Sense in 1776, and it's common sense reasons we need independence. Number one, Britain's too far away from us. Number two, a little place like Britain doesn't need to be telling a big place like the colonies what to do. Number three, hey, you've had bloodshed. It's too late to apologize. So that's the third kind of common sense argument. All right, Second Continental Congress meets, and they appoint a committee of 5 to write a Declaration of Independence. Committee of 5 has 3 big names: Jefferson, Adams, Benjamin Franklin. 2 guys kind of been lost to history, Livingston and Sherman. All right, but the main writer there is Jefferson, and so Declaration of Independence it's a kind of very logical 6-parter. So number 1, he says we got to explain why we're doing this. Number 2, everybody's got rights. Number 3, government's got to protect those rights. 4, if it doesn't protect the rights, you got to get rid of it. All right, so 5, King George hadn't protected rights. So 6, you got to get rid of King George, got to declare independence. Okay, the fighting wasn't going well initially. Washington lost in New York, so then he's crossing the Delaware. We remember it's Christmas night. The Hessians have been kind of taking it easy on Christmas Day, and so he wins the battle at Trenton first and then Princeton. So kind of encourages the Americans, the year 1776. So you're talking about Americans now. All right, Saratoga is the turning point battle of the war. Benedict Arnold, who goes on to become a traitor, defeats Burgoyne, who's one of these bad generals. Hal's the other one who has the mistresses, so they kind of want to kick back and have a good time, not fight all that hard. So, I mean, the American generals are much more committed than the British generals are. Benjamin Franklin had been over there in France, wearing his coonskin cap and flirting with the French ladies and trying to win French support for the American war effort. But the French, who are mad about the French and Indian War, waiting to see if we've actually got a chance to win before they commit. But after the Battle of Saratoga, they start helping us out. All right, down the south, the fighting Quaker is Nathaniel Greene. He's practicing guerrilla warfare down there, so the fight's pretty brutal. Last battle's Yorktown. Cornwallis had been fighting Greene down in the south, and he moves his way up to Yorktown, which is in Virginia, right on the Chesapeake Bay, close to Jamestown. And he gets cornered. He thinks he's either going to be rescued or resupplied by the British Navy, but the French Navy beats him down there. So his problem is he's got Washington at his front, the French Navy at his back, so he's cornered. So he surrenders. That's the last battle of the war. Remember, the band played, the world turned upside down. Cornwallis was too embarrassed to show up. So the Treaty of Paris, Britain is recognizing our independence. We'd already declared it, but they're recognizing it. We're getting a whole lot more land, doubling the size, getting the Northwest Territory, getting everything to the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Let's see, Florida goes back to Spain, and then we guarantee good treatment of the Loyalists here in the United States. All right, and that is that chapter. All right, so let's go back over and just see the slides that go with it. There's kind of the advantages of each side. We didn't put it on the PowerPoint, but we've got the French. We've got good leaders, military, diplomatic, kind of. Let's see. Those 2 guys were military leaders. We believed in what they were doing. They've got kind of the resource advantages, generally speaking. All right. Let's see. So there's Bunker Hill, and there he is crossing the Delaware at Princeton. All right, yeah, there's the battle. Saratoga's the turning point, and Greene, and then Yorktown. All right, the people and the ideas, so there's common sense. The three arguments there. There's a 4-point version of the Declaration of Independence. You got to explain why, then all the political ideas, then the list of grievances about King George. Remember, if you read it, said he has, and so we're declaring independence. All right, there's the strategies. That didn't. So there's the treaty. All right. We're independent. They're recognizing independence, and we're promising good treatment of the loyalists. All right, and that's the next chapter. All right, so we go up here. 11 minutes left in class. We'll see if we can finish it up before the bell rings here. All right. So what was it? The government during the Revolution was the Continental Congress, kind of the de facto government. Didn't have time to ratify the Articles of Confederation. Plus, there's kind of tension over Western lands. So it took until 1781 to ratify the Articles. All right, Articles of Confederation was set up strong state governments, weak national government. All right. Under the Articles, the national government, the weak national government, had 4 powers, but there's like an asterisk for each one. So it could make laws, but it required a supermajority, 9 states. It could go to war and raise an army, but you had to ask permission of the states to send troops. Didn't have the power to draft. Could make treaties, but so could states, and states' treaties could undermine a national treaty. All right, the weakness is, the acronym is REST, couldn't regulate trade, couldn't enforce laws, couldn't settle disputes, and most importantly, couldn't tax. So if you can't tax, can't really do anything because you got to pay for all that stuff. All right, Shays Rebellion, you got all those guys in Massachusetts come back home from the war, and they're being heavily taxed by their state. And they don't have much in the way of money because they didn't get paid very much during the war because the government didn't have the power to tax. So they're losing their land. So they're taking over the auctions, not letting their land be sold. They're busting their buddies out of jail and debtor's prison, and they're going to take all the guns in Springfield and march on Boston. All right, it doesn't work out. A state militia stops it, but it shows that the government under the Articles is too weak. All right, so you have a couple of meetings. First meeting to try to fix the Articles at Annapolis, but only 5 states show up. So they call for a second meeting. So that's going to be the Philadelphia Convention, also known as the Constitutional Convention, where Madison comes along and instead of proposing amendments to the Articles, proposes the Virginia Plan, a whole new plan for government. All right, so you end up with 3 compromises there. The Virginia Plan is the big state plan, representation by population, so the small states don't like that. So they got the small states where all states would be equal. So they put it together with a great compromise. And so you have one house, the House of Representatives, based on the big state plan, where the bigger the state, the more power they have. And one state, one house, the Senate, all states are equal. So that's based on the small state plan. The other 2 compromises had to do with slavery. They weren't as successful. The slave trade compromise said the slave trade would go on for 20 years. 3/5 compromise said when you're counting people for the House of Representatives, you count 3/5 of the slaves. It's a compromise, but it seems to imply that slaves are 3/5 of a person. Okay, so Federalists were in favor of the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were against it. They said the government was too weak. It wouldn't protect states' rights or people's rights. The government was going to be remote from the people. The president was too much like a king, and the Electoral College was undemocratic. All right, the Federalist Papers were, so 3 things are done to win over the Anti-Federalists. Washington is promised as president. The Bill of Rights gets written, or the Bill of Rights is promised, and then these Federalist Papers are written to persuade New York Anti-Federalists. And so they're written by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. Okay, Federalist 10 is the one about faction. So Madison's writing both of these. And so he says, what you got to do about a faction is you spread them out. Bigger is better. If a big country is better than a small country, in a small country, one faction could dominate and, the will of the people would be thwarted. But in a big country, the farmers are spread out, the merchants are spread out, so no one faction can dominate. And that's kind of Madison's unique political theory. Everybody before that had always said you want a smaller country where everybody knows everybody. All right, Federalist 51 is kind of the argument that this is the just right plan for government. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. So, hey, we tried a weak government on the articles, didn't quite work out. You had Shays' Rebellion. If angels were to govern men, neither internal or external controls would be necessary. Yeah, we got a strong government, but you got the elections, that's the external controls, and checks and balances, that's the internal controls. All right, let's finish this thing out. Let's keep going. Let's get Washington here with, 6 minutes left? All right, so he's unanimous. He's the only one ever elected unanimously. His cabinet had 3 big names on it. Hamilton is Treasury, Jefferson's at State, and then Knox, not quite as big a name, Secretary of War. All right, Hamilton puts a tax on whiskey. That's a tax on the common man. The farmers in western Pennsylvania this time get all fired up about it, but Washington goes marching out there with 13,000 troops, and by the time he gets out there, they've disappeared. They're afraid of him. All right, so he's showing that this time the government's strong enough as opposed to Shays' Rebellion where the government was too weak. All right, farewell address. When he steps down, he says, "Look out for political parties, permanent alliances. Either one of them will get you in a war. Parties makes everybody here fight against each other, so you could have a civil war. Permanent alliances get you pulled into a world war." All right, the Neutrality Proclamation, we're staying neutral between Britain and France because we got to have a baby boom. We got to have a new generation born, and these guys grow to be young men, and then they can fight a war. But right now, we're too small and weak to be fighting another war after the Revolution. Okay, Hamilton says debt's a good thing if it's a manageable debt. Because you can use the debt to make 3 groups happy, all right? You make the rich people happy, and those are the movers and shakers that are going to support the new government. All right, you make the states happy when you assume the states' debts, and remember, they're kind of mad about losing their power from the Articles of Confederation. All right, and finally, you impress the rest of the world. You kind of win the respect of the rest of the world. So this debt is good for political reasons here. You impress these different, really important groups of people. All right, so he's going to have his tax on whiskey. He's going to put his money in the national bank, and that's going to set a uniform national currency. So it's good for the country, but Jefferson says you can't do it because the words national bank are not one of the enumerated powers in the Constitution. All right. So Hamilton, on the other hand, says, well, the Constitution doesn't say I can't create a national bank, and the elastic clause says that suggests that there are implied powers. If you need a power for carrying out the listed powers, well, then it's all right for that. So that's called either the necessary and proper clause or the elastic clause. So Jefferson's in favor of a strict reading or strict construction of the Constitution, and Hamilton is in favor of this looser reading with implied powers. All right, their followers form the 2 political parties. So it's going to be the Federalists and the Republicans. The Republicans are they're Jefferson's folks. They're the Farmer Party. Weak government, strict construction, located in the South, and they like France. The Federalists are the Hamiltonian Party, strong government, loose construction, pro-British, located in the North, and they're the business-oriented party. All right, the election of 1796, Adams, the Federalist, is barely going to beat Jefferson by 3 electoral votes, but then Jefferson becomes vice president because the 12th Amendment hadn't come along. So Adams has to deal with this original hostage crisis where all these boats are attacked by the French, and to negotiate for the release of these hostages, secret agents X, Y, and Z want a bribe, and Adams won't pay the bribe. We don't negotiate with terrorists, is what we would say today. All right, but his own party wants to go to war. He won't do it, but he passes anti-French laws, really. All right, so the Alien Act says you got to be here 14 years to become a citizen. He doesn't want any French immigrants voting against him. Sedition Acts take away freedom of speech. The Supreme Court hadn't established the power of judicial review, so it's up to Jefferson and Madison to assert that states have the right to nullify laws they see as unconstitutional. All right, so that is the thing there with about a minute to spare. All right. Let's see. I've got to hit this thing.